Dragon was a Marine. Then he wasn't. It wasn't a very nice place to be, you see. And where did he get his tattoo? It's a blink and you'll miss it appearing moment in this chapter. Plus, do you remember one of the greatest moments in One Piece of Zoro on Thriller Bark? Well, as it turns out, Kuma did that every week for pretty much his entire life. And each and every week, nothing would happen. In fact, Kuma's whole life consists of a whole ton of nothing, really. And you know, something this chapter made me realize, something very special, is seeing Kuma's eyes. In the modern day, even pre-time skip, they were lifeless. Even Esper's eyes are seemingly devoid of life. And considering these are some of the most basic eyes in the whole series, Oda somehow in this chapter fills us with this surplus of gentle kindness. I mean, each eye is just line, dot. And it might be the simplicity that does it. Like Luffy's eyes. There's a certain innocence and honesty about them. Like there's nothing to hide. These characters really are just this simple and open. Meanwhile, Ginny is morphing into Bonnie, proudly sporting sister across her chest. And at first I thought, mate, this relationship with Kuma isn't going very well, because he's quite thoroughly sister-zoned her. But it's more likely a religious reference to nuns calling each other sister and writing sister across each other's breasts, just in case anyone forgets what to call them. I'm pretty sure that's what nuns do. But the Ginny-Kuma relationship is very Eiichiro Oda romance. You've got Ginny saying, I want to get married, and then you've got Kuma going, let's not do that. Let's do literally anything except that. Like join this global vigilante group, that sounds fun. But of course, there is a lot more to it than that. Kuma obviously wants to take the next step, or I guess any step with Ginny, but he keeps flashing back to his parents. Even though it was only his father who was a buccaneer, his mother was still taken, enslaved, and ultimately murdered as a result of that. So look, I'm gonna give Kuma's commitment issues a pass, especially since we know that this story is not ending well for him. But I also love that he is completely oblivious to everyone around him. Because you've got Bonnie's future crew members always simping over Ginny, and Kuma's just like, wow, aren't they kind? Isn't it lovely having such wonderful people around us? But the whole situation on the Sorbet Kingdom is giving me nostalgia in all of the wrong ways. It's very Arlong-esque, really, because this is the first time that the tribute tax has been explained, I think. And it's not just a lump sum per nation, it's actually calculated by population. So if we go back to East Blue, Arlong is essentially placing himself in the same position of a world noble by using their taxation system. But also this adds a whole new aspect of horror. Because under this system, it's actually in the best interest for the monarch to, well, for want of a better word, purge their kingdom. Because the less people you have, the less tribute you have to pay. So it gives already sociopathic monarchs an even greater incentive to do horrible things, which is what we're seeing happen right here in the Sorbet Kingdom. It's like trickle-down cockery. It's not bad enough that the world nobles exist and do all of their horrible things, but their actions actually end up encouraging the lower nobility to become more and more like them. And Kuma sees that. He's watching the evolution of the Sorbet Kingdom slowly morphing into Marijois, and that's what pushes him to perform his Ursa Shock, to actually hurt people for the very first time, but we'll get into that in a bit. King Bakori is a pretty clear juxtaposition to Kuma, this wealthy, miserly king who refuses to spend a modicum of cash monies to feed his people, versus Kuma, a man who effectively has nothing, but gives everything he does have to others, even if that's his own physical well-being. So speaking of, we were very right about Kuma taking all of the pain himself, and it looks like he creates roughly the same size bubble as Luffy's pain and anguish on Thriller Bark. Remembering that Kuma is a pretty big boy, so this bubble is actually colossal, and the scale is not an accident. What Zoro did that one time on Thriller Bark, Kuma was doing regularly once a week, in fact, I don't even know how long. Long time. More than once. More than twice. Long time. And it gives a lot of meat to why Ginny was acting a bit snappy towards all of the elderly people, because even seeing their happy faces, Ginny knew the toll that this was going to take on Kuma. With the old people though, look, it's the small things that makes me appreciate Eiichiro Oda's artistic skill the most, because you look at this gaggle of elders, and they all have such unique designs. Faces, hairstyles, assorted wrinkles, and perhaps most impressively, they all have stupidly detailed unique clothing. And he can just crap that framework out in a couple of minutes. So for that reason, I really appreciate the gang of elders. Sadly though, since we met these people when Kuma was 17, I imagine that they're all dead now. Zoro's Thriller Bark scene hits a lot harder now. When that first happened on Thriller Bark, Kuma was such an unknown quantity. It was hard to know whether he was really on our side, or if he was playing some sort of sick torture game to see how far he could push people. Kuma even has this super chilling line. In exchange, I will give you a glimpse of hell. And along with this whole scene, this line has much more meaning now. Because as it turns out, Kuma himself was very well acquainted with this hell. It's a hell that he'd been living his entire life. As a child slave, he was being beaten, and then when he was free, he was willingly taking on other people's pain. And I think it's worth asking the question, has Kuma ever known a life without horrific pain? Although Kuma's whole involvement on Thriller Bark only becomes more fascinating, because back then it did look like he was about to kill Luffy with his cyborg laser mouth, but then after all of of this, Kuma leaves and says, "He's your son after all, Dragon," and remembering that this was a time before that was publicly known. Emporio Ivankov didn't even know that Dragon had a son. So what was Kuma's intent there? Was he actually going to kill and or capture Luffy? Maybe he did a Mihawk and was like, alright, let's just leave his survival to fate. Enter Zoro, the Kuma of the Straw Hats. Of each of the crew members, he's definitely the one that tends to endure the most physical pain. And Zoro even asks Kuma to change the location so that he can bear the suffering on his own. Just like how Kuma did the same in the privacy of his church house. With Zoro, it makes me wonder if Kuma has ever made this offer to others before. And if so, how many people have actually taken him up on it after receiving that small bubble taste? I can definitely imagine Zoro being the first person other than Kuma to do it. And then maybe Kuma saw part of his younger self and thought even though his time has passed, there is still hope. Especially since Zoro was just a regular dude. He's not even a buccaneer. But I need to know what created this Kuma. The Kuma we meet on Thriller Bark is absolutely not the same person to the pure-hearted martyr we're seeing right now in this flashback. Thriller Bark Kuma seems significantly more disillusioned with the world. He's almost apathetic in the way that he targeted Luffy. Yeah, it's Dragon's son and, I like Dragon, but orders are orders. If it's meant to be, he'll survive, or not. I, Kuma, do not care because hope is dead. And this is the same Kuma who didn't lose hope when his mother died or when his father died. So what is it that triggers this transformation? Ginny perhaps, or maybe it's even deeper than that. One way I could see this apathetic transformation happening would be if the people of Sorbet Kingdom turned against him, like everyone whose pain and suffering he endured, for all of it to amount to betrayal or something along those lines. But with those people, I love that even after joining the Revolutionary Army, Kuma kept coming back to them. And the reason why he kept going back to the Sorbet Kingdom was to absorb their pain and make them happier. To the Ursa's shock now, because this moment is not to be underestimated. Up until this point, Kuma has taken insane quantities of pain, but this is the first time that he's ever hurt other people, which we know that he's definitely more than willing to do in the modern timeline, but this is our first step towards that. Our first step in breaking down a seemingly unwavering pacifist. And what it took was threatening others with the same hell that he experienced as a slave. And from here, I think that Kuma is only going to be pushed further and further and further. But also, this was a pretty important step because Kuma was about to join an army, and armies, they're generally known for engaging in fight battling, which tends to hurt people. And on that note, Emporio Ivankov again proves why he is one of the greatest characters in this world, showing up magically in yet another time of need, and also in yet another prison-based situation. And we see a lot of new revolutionaries in this chapter, or freedom fighters. And to this, I have the same praise as I did with the old people. Oda just craps out this legion of brand new and unique freedom fighters. And for a brief moment, I thought that one of them may have been Bello Betty because of the similar top hat and skirt aesthetic, but Bello Betty would have been about 12 years old at the time, I think. So these guys, I'm pretty sure are all brand new. And it worries me that I don't recognize a lot of these characters because they seem like pretty important figures in the early days of the Revolutionary Army. So they all potentially met very, very tragic fates. Seeing Kuma look up to Dragon was very powerful though, because you know what Kuma's seeing. He's looking to Dragon as a role model in the same sort of way that Kuma's father looked to the sun god Nika. But Kuma has found someone of substance who could actually potentially deliver on that. Someone who isn't just a legend, someone tangible. And then what happens? Dragon's son goes on to become the aforementioned sun god, a sun god. But you just know that Kuma is fanboying so hard in this moment where Dragon storms the prison. It's like if there was a knock at the door and then bam, it's your favorite celebrity standing right there and they say, "No time to explain, come with me to do celebrity things." I don't know what people do. I only know what I do, and that's make videos about fictional pirates on the internet. But a very popular theory was very casually confirmed, which is that Dragon was once a Marine. And that makes all the sense in the world, being the son of Garp the hero. Garp, of course, wanted Luffy to become a Marine. He also wanted Ace to be a Marine, but Dragon was the first project. His firstborn to follow in his footsteps and become the hero that no one else until Kobe wanted to be. From the conversation that Ginny and Kuma have about Dragon, we know that he left the Marines at least 25 years ago. So at his oldest, he could have been 30 in the Marines. And that's pretty old. That means he could have worked his way quite far up the ranks. Could have even been as high as Vice Admiral. Because we have Vice Admirals all over the age spectrum, but being in your 30s is not uncommon. In fact, Kuzan and Sakazuki were definitely both Vice Admirals in their 30s because we know they had those ranks during the Ohara incident. And a weirdly real possibility exists that there is a reality where both Garp and Dragon held the same rank at the same time. Dragon must be considered very much the opposite to Garp. Garp is the world's greatest hero, and Dragon, the most wanted man in the world, is the greatest villain. From their perspective, what a monumental failure that someone so talented was twisted and turned against them. So in terms of Dragon's age, this means that he was in the same batch of recruits as Kizaru and Sakazuki. Maybe not Kuzan because he's a bit younger younger than them, but if Dragon had stayed in the Marines, there is no doubt that he would have been an admiral. And if things went very well, perhaps even fleet admiral now instead of Sakazuki. So about that, to say that Sakazuki has a bit of bad blood with Dragon would be putting it lightly. This is one of those subtle needles hidden in a gigantic pirate haystack. But Sakazuki has a particular hatred for Dragon that goes beyond anyone or anything else. When he was talking to and about Luffy at Marineford, Sakazuki kept bringing up Dragon. No one asked, he just kept saying it. Luffy wasn't Luffy to him. Luffy was son of Dragon. In fact, Sakazuki mentions Dragon almost as many times during Marineford than anyone else throughout the entire series up until this point. He's always like, son of Dragon must kill Dragon's son. Hand over, son of Dragon, Jinbei. In fact, he says that last line twice. And that's what leads to his very purist approach of stating that Luffy was a criminal by blood. It's just genetic because you're the spawn of Dragon. Ooh, Dragon don't like Dragon, bad man. Me, Sakazuki, good man. Me, kill son of bad man. Because son of bad man is also bad man, and that makes me even gooder man. And this prejudice is starting to make a lot more sense because Dragon and Sakazuki are both exactly the same age. They're both 55. So they were probably recruits together. Sakazuki may have been the Helmeppo to Dragon's Kobe. They may have been close comrades or even friends for about a decade. And again, if Dragon had remained in the Marines, I have no doubt that they would both have been admirals together. But then Dragon went and committed the ultimate taboo, the greatest of insults to the justice. And now it's very, very personal for Sakazuki because he went well out of his way to try and kill Luffy after executing Ace. The way I see it, killing Ace was his duty, but killing Luffy was his passion. And knowing that Dragon was a Marine makes that conversation with Vegapunk on Ohara a lot more interesting because Dragon was sickened to hear that Stella was employed by the world government. What a shill. But then Stella replies, the world government is a massive organization, and within the Navy in particular, there are many reasonable people to be found. Don't lose sight of the goal, Dragon. And this now is a pretty amazing clapback because Dragon himself was one of those reasonable people to be found. So Stella shut him up pretty good. And another oh snap line is when Kuzan was fighting Garp on Hachinosu and said something like, you have a habit of raising enemies, Garp. So that was much more true than we thought and a pretty significant deep cut. This probably isn't the week for it, but at some stage I think it would be worth looking into the endless optimism of Monkey D. Garp. For him to keep going even though the closest people in his life keep turning to the complete opposite path of him. His son, his grandson, his Kus-san, all of this, and he just keeps smiling all the way through, which is a very Joy Boy-esque trait. And just imagine if Kobe failed him as well. Garp would immediately move on and just say, well, at least I've still got Helmeppo. Something we should talk about before we get to the big question though, is that this was an unusually short chapter. Standard desirable chapter lengths in Weekly Shonen Jump are somewhere between 15 to 18 pages. This one was 13. And there are a whole lot of series out there where short chapters are more normal than others, but that's mainly where my concern comes from. Because there we're talking series like Jujutsu Kaisen and Hunter x Hunter. And in those cases, a lot of the times the chapters are shorter because the authors have health issues preventing them from meeting the 15 to 18 page standard. So I did look this up, and in 1097 chapters of One Piece, there are only 3 examples of a 13 page chapter. This one, 803 and 825. So it does make me worry just, ever so slightly about Oda, because he is the hardest working man in manga, and he did just have surgery. But I'm not going to do any wild speculating now because it's not unprecedented, just incredibly rare and very unusual. So let's put that aside for now and talk about Bonnie. She wasn't in this chapter, and that's kind of the point. There's still no word on Bonnie's existence, and numerically, it's not really matching up. It's quite curious because the chapter ends very dramatically with Ginny being kidnapped, and part of me says that this isn't the big tragic moment we're waiting for because Bonnie still doesn't exist, but that raises 2 immediate thoughts. Thought number the first. This chapter ends at the 14 years ago mark, meaning that if Bonnie doesn't already exist, then at most she can only be around 13 years old. I mean, maybe Ginny and Kuma performed interspecies intercourse off screen, and Bonnie is sitting in some sort of revolutionary daycare right now. But if not, the Bonnie we're seeing right now is definitely not her true form. And as it's been hinted to many times now, she could actually be a small child pretending to be an adult with her magical fruit. Bonnie's devil fruit now has a name, by the way. It's called the Toshi Toshi no Mi, which means age fruit. It was revealed very recently in the SBS of volume 107, and it was accompanied by Oda essentially saying, oh yeah, I guess I forgot to say the name of the fruit in the series. I should probably do that at some point. So it's that, or, and yes, I have to bring this up, Bonnie could be a clone of Ginny. a clone who was accelerated into an adult body, much like how the Seraphim have accelerated growth. Also, there is a chance that Bonnie isn't the biological child of Kuma and Ginny at all, because from what we see of Bonnie as a child, she grew up extremely poor, meaning that she could have been just a kid that Kuma stumbled upon and decided to raise because she reminded him of Ginny, and he even gave her the name Bonnie as a slight tribute. With Kuma, and this has always been the case with him, the more information Oda gives us about Kuma, the more questions I have. And as for another question, who kidnapped Ginny? This is a tough one because we don't know if it was the Marines, the pirates, or even another faction, because the Revolutionary Army operates in the business of assisting, well, revolutions in other kingdoms, so it could be neither a pirate nor a Marine. It could be the forces of the, quote, certain kingdom, which I believe is in East Blue because Ginny is the commander of the Eastern Army, which is actually the role that Belo Betty goes on to inherit. So we don't know of anything happening in East Blue 14 years ago. In fact, literally the only thing we do know about East Blue from 14 years ago is that that's when Choo Choo was born. So very, very important here. But speaking of years, we don't have that many chapters left in 2023. So this year might end on a pretty tragic note. So you let me know in the comments, who do you think kidnapped Ginny?